Hello and welcome to my lecture on forms in PHP. This lecture and audio and video are copyright Creative Commons attribution. So this is an important point in our progress because PHP so far is kind of like a programming language, and if you've done HTML and CSS, that's kind of like this static way to describe things, but forms are where the static and the dynamic kind of come together, and it's where you actually need server processing to take the data from the forms, do calculations, and then generate new pages. And so the basic idea of a form, and I'm going to assume that you already know HTML and know how to make a form. I'll talk about a few of the different tags in forms, but I'm not going to teach you all of HTML. Okay, so our form tag here and our end form. And there's labels for them, and I got a paragraph tag, but the sort of the business end of this form is the input tags. Like this is a text field, and we have to give this, it effectively becomes a variable name when it moves into PHP. ID, this is not, doesn't have anything to do with PHP, it has to do with CSS, and that's just a way to put an ID on, and this ID matches that ID right there, and that's sort of within the HTML document. ID is an HTML thing. But the name equals is sort of the place where the data gets sent. Input type submit says that there is a button. So let's take a look at this code in action. Oops, got to click the right thing. And so here's the sample code. You might want to download this sample code so you can play with it on your system if you like. So there it is, okay, and so that's the rendering of that particular bit of HTML, and so it allows us to type, and sort of nothing happens here. Nothing happens here until we hit the submit button. So the submit button is how the this input type equals submit, that causes the submit button to exist, and input type equals text gives us a text box for which that we can type. When we press the submit button, the browser looks through the form. In this case, looks through the form. Oops, looks through the form. The browser looks through the form, finds all of the values, pulls the text out of the input box, and then sends that to the server. In this case, we haven't specified how we want it sent, so it's going to send it to the server in the simplest way, and it's going to do that. I've got to make this bigger. It's going to do that by adding to the end of the URL. Is going to add the name of the form equals and then the value that we typed into the input form. And then it does a GET request to that, and that runs the PHP in the server. And so if I change my guess to 25 and hit it, you'll see that that changes to 25. So as we talked about in a previous lecture, this get data, which is these question mark key equals value, they are copied into the server and made into these super global arrays. Now the data that we just did on the end of the URL, that is what's called get data. Oops. That is what's called get data. In a second we'll look at post data, and that's for forms that have been sent to the server using a post. But the get data, which is what we just did, sends it in that particular, it shows up in get. So if we take a look at this code form 2, we got some HTML here, and then we have a pre-tag, and then we drop into PHP. And all we're doing is dumping out the get array. So print r $get. This is that super global array. That's all that get data. Okay, and so you will see the first time through it will print this out and get will be empty, and then we'll put something in, and then we'll hit the submit button, and then we'll get something that looks like this, where we'll actually see the guess in the PHP. So the code will end up running more than once, right? So the first time through we just hit form2.php, it retrieves it and shows it to us. Okay, there's no parameter on here. Now if I make my guess be 75 and then I press submit, it's going to make another round trip to the server, except that it's going to grab a different URL this time. It's going to grab the URL with the question mark on it, right? this question mark on it. It's going to grab that URL, and that is the URL it's going to retrieve. But the PHP code is going to, the PHP library, without any work on our part, is going to put all those key values into guess equals 75. And if I say ampersand x equals 12, you will see that the get array just reflects the combination of whatever ampersand y equals 66, bang. It just reflects the combination of those things. So the get array just is the parsing of that information on the URL request. Now, if we don't want to send our data in on the URL, we can do what's called a post. And a post is a different way of delivering that form data into the browser. And we do this by simply saying on that form tag, please transport all the data that we're sending. Please transport that in using post rather than get. And the primary difference inside of PHP is the super global that we're going to be working with is $_post rather than $_get. So in this case, if we type like 12 here, or in this case 42, and we hit the submit button, it'll come through and it will show the value is 42 in the post array. And that's because this particular form and that particular submit button has been told to gather up its data and send it to the server using a post request. Okay, so let's take a look at form 3. So if I go to form3.php, no, perhaps it should say form3.php. So here we go. We're printing out the post and the get, and again, there was no post data and there was no get data, and so these things are both empty, right? Now if I put 42 in here and then I hit submit, it's going to hit the same URL, but the post data is delivered in a different manner. So you will see that the post represents the value that came from this form. We got a whole new page, right? And as a result of the post coming back to us, the response from the post gave us a whole new page and showed us what the post data was. Now you'll notice there is no question mark on the end. And so that's how post data, and we'll talk a little bit more in a second about how that data is actually transported. But the key for now is that it's not transported on the URL. Get data is transported on the URL. And when you're doing a form, you can either choose to do get or post, right? Here we're saying, for this particular form, when it's time to send that data, send it as post data. If you omit that, then you're telling it you would like the data sent as get data. And you are the server, so you're generating this HTML, and so you can make that choice, and that's okay. So there are these two ways. Get, in get, they're placed on the URL, and post, they're actually sent when it makes the connection. And so we don't really need to know this in tremendous detail, but if you were to put a monitor on the wire as your browser was talking to the web server, and it made a connection to port 80 and it sent a get, says get and then the URL, and then it puts the question mark right there. And so that's how get data looks. And then there's a few other things that it sends, like what kind of a browser it is, etc., etc. If you're sending a post request, the first thing that your browser sends to the server is post and then the URL with nothing on the end of it, a bit of data, and then it sends the data as a series of key values. This is a connection that it's made and sending these lines to the web server. The web server does its thing, and then back comes our page. Okay, and so the difference is the get is actually part of the URL that's been requested. The post does not put anything on the URL, but actually sends the post data along the connection. Okay? Don't need to know this. Just know that the get is on the URL and the post is part of the connection. So you tend to use get and post for very specific situations. It's rare that there's not a rule that tells you when you're supposed to use them. So you're never supposed to change data with a get. Web crawlers like Google tend to follow get links and do not follow post links. So things like deleting a file or editing content in a web record, they are generally posts. So when data is being created and modified. And so get URLs should generally retrieve the same thing every time you hit them, because web crawlers are going to kind of believe that whatever they are, including the parameters, are going to have some meaning. And sometimes the data you're sending is just too big to put on a GET request. There's sort of a limit as to how much it is. It's not exactly sure exactly what that limit is, but it's not 100,000 characters. So we have that limit. Okay, so I want to talk about how you might handle this data. So one thing you'll notice is every time we've done this data, the form comes back blank, right? So let's take a look at that. So if I say 42, oops, sorry, clear, get thing. So when I say 42 and I say 41, I don't have the old value. Your brain kind of thinks it should work that way because so many things do work that way. But we have to do a little bit of work to make it work that way. Okay, and so this is the work that we have to do to make it so the number reappears here. Okay, and so what we do is when this code starts up, we're going to do a bit of work to check to see if there's any post data. Now the key thing is, remember that when we first go to this, there is no post data, and then we fill the thing in and we hit it again, then it goes through a second time. So the first time through, there is no post data. So this is set post guess is going to be false. So I'm using the ternary operator here, and so this variable old guess is going to be the empty string. So old guess is nothing the first time through because there is no post data with the key of guess. So old guess is this variable. We come through, we start printing things out. We have form blah blah blah, label blah blah blah. Okay, so then we have input type equals text, name equals guess. This is all HTML here, but then we switch into PHP and we echo the string value equals double quote concatenated with the old guess concatenated with another double quote. The single quotes are the strings in PHP. The double quotes are actually part of the output. We'll see this in a second. And then we go back to HTML, and then we finish. This is the finishing of the input tag, and then this is another input tag, input type equals submit, and then we end the form. So we're partway through this input tag. We're going to have some of the HTML that comes out be generated by PHP. So when I first request it, there's no post data. I'm actually doing a GET request right now. And so there's no post data. No post data came in, and nothing came here. But if I say 35, then I hit submit, then it makes the post. The data goes in. You will see this, but it's also back in here. Now if I take a look at a view source of this, you will see in this text, right? The input type equals text, name equals guess, and then this is what came out of my echo statement. Remember, like the single quotes value equals, this was part of that string. So we printed out value equals single quote, and then we printed out the old guess and another single quote, and then the end of the input tag. So the input tag goes from here to here. One of the things we kind of do is we take advantage of, often when we're doing this, that doesn't look like beautifully handwritten HTML, but we're putting this on a new line because this bit actually came from PHP and this bit didn't come from PHP, and so we got and so away we go. So we basically hand push this 35 back in. We put code in. We put code, PHP code in to solve that problem, to stick the string value equals 35 in there. And if you do it over and over and over again, oops, I'm forever leaving my mousy thing on, leaving my scribbler on. So I can change this. So it can be like 105, right? And it's sticky. Now we had to do some work to make this happen. 105,555. Submit. Now it's still doing a post, but we are carefully taking our old post data and sticking it back in the form. Okay? So, it seems simple enough, right? But the problem is we can put a nasty character. And This is what people do on websites. They put bad things on to see just how they can break your PHP or HTML or whatever. And so we're going to put a character sequence in that is going to mess this up. And so watch what happens. And I got to construct this carefully. I win. Yeah. So I'm going to hit submit. So what happened is I escaped, right? I escaped out of this. I mean, I put in I put in this double quote less than I win, etc. And what happened is it escaped here, which means that I would generally not put something in as nice as just I win, but I could put something in that would do something bad to your browser, send you to a bad website. Who knows what I'm going to do? Okay, and so that is a problem where if you look at the output that comes out, the double quote was what I typed in. This was the user input. This part here is the user input. And so value equals double quote. The browser sees this as the end of that string. And the browser sees this as the end of the input tag. And now this was something I typed on input, and it's being treated as the actual HTML. And so that's how the word die in bold shows up outside the form tag, because I, in my single quote that I typed in the form tag. So this is not a good thing to do. Okay. Thankfully, there is a function that's built into PHP, because this is like one of the most common problems of not what we call sanitizing your input. And so all we do is we take that string, whatever that string happens to be, and we pass it into the function HTML entities. So old guess is whatever that string is that the person typed, and then HTML entities does what's called escaping it. And that means that things like less than are turned into ampersand LT semicolon. And there's a whole series of these HTML entities that are there. So let's take a look at what happens in form 5, where we're actually using HTML entities. So form 5, I do quote less than, oh, there it is right there. And I submit it, and it just comes back whatever I typed. But if I do a view source of this, you see that what I typed has got turned into ampersand double quote, then a greater than, then a less than, and so these are not actually active characters, right? The first character that got me in trouble was the double quote, but that is show me a double quote, but don't interpret it as a double quote. And so this ends up being the result of HTML escaping double quote, less than, greater than, etc. And so the entire value from a browser's perspective is from here to here, which is the original place. The code that the data I typed in did not escape from the form, and so it stayed right in the form. Okay? So you basically, anytime you take data that came from the user and you're going to put it back out in part of HTML, you really want to wrap it in the HTML entities function call to make sure that you're not letting the user take over your browser. So here's how that turns out. So there are lots of ways that we can process post data, and we're going to learn all kinds of things, and it's always good to sort of develop a pattern in this kind of thing. So I basically like to structure my PHP files the following way, and that is there are certain things that you want to do based on the processing of the post data that comes in. Now, the first time through the script, there is no post data, so it sort of skips this post data processing and then generates the HTML. So this is the HTML of the page, and this is the logic to handle the post data. Okay, and so this is effectively silent. It's silent code. And so I like to be able to draw a line in my code to say, above here, I'm handling my input data and doing various things, and I've not emitted any output yet. and then draw the line and say from that point on I'm going to emit output. And there's lots of other patterns and libraries that sort of do all this stuff, but this is just my way of doing it without using a library, so you can all see it in one file basically. You may choose to do this. And so here is the file guess.php. It's a little small, but you can see this line here. So the first part of the program, the very first character, drops into PHP, and it does all of its post handling. And then at the end, it drops out of PHP and then starts emitting its HTML. And so that's the pattern. So let's look a little more closely. We're going to write a guessing game. So let's play a little bit with this guessing game. It's called guess.php. It's similar to an assignment that I often give. Oops. So there's guess.php. So here's our little guessing game. And so we'll go 2, your guess is too low, 200, your guess is too high, and 42, your guess is just right. So that's our little guessing game. So let's talk about how we achieve this. So the top part of the code is this first bit that's doing all the post code. And so we're going to drop through two variables, the old guess and the message as to whether the guess was right or wrong. And so that we're going to set these values so that guess and message are guess is nothing and message is false unless we have some post data. So if we have post data, then we're going to run this. So if is set post sub guess, so that means is the key guess in post, which means are we responding to a post request, because we named the thing post guess later on. And so if we've got one, then we're going to run this if statement. And I'm just doing a little trick where I take and I'm going to turn into a number by adding the post data to 0. Now if the post data is not a number, it's okay. It just turns into 0. So it means that a guess like Fred will be Fred plus 0 is 0, and so that means it's going to be less than 42. We can test that in a second. So it should say too low. If the guess is exactly 42, we say that we set the message to great job. If the guess is less, we say too low. Otherwise, we say too high. None of this is produced output. There's no echo statements. There's no HTML statements. No nothing in here. All we're going to do is come across this line, imaginary line of mine, with some variables, and then we'll switch to what's below the line that's actually generating the output. So now we have the same line, and we got those two variables, guess and HTML, guess and message coming out. And so now we've left PHP, and we're just HTML, head, body, guessing game, yada yada. And then we drop into PHP, and what we do is we check to see if the message is not the same as false. Remember, not triple equals means not equal to in value and type. So we set message to false to indicate that it's our first time through and we've got no message. So we only print out a message if the message has been set to something other than false. Now I don't have to HTML entities because I made these messages. Okay, so that message is just code I've got in my thing. Hopefully I'm not putting bad HTML into my own code base. So I don't really have to put that in HTML entities. And then this little bit here is the pattern we had before, where we have a form, and we basically take the value, and then we concatenate it with HTML entities of the old guess, and that's how we make sure that the old guess shows up. Okay?